Hi, welcome to the China Unscripted podcast. I'm Chris Chappell.
And I'm Matt Ganeshta.
Wait, where's Shelley?
Shelley is in Canada.
Ugh, why Canada?
She had something to take care of there with family.
Oh, assassination?
I don't know.
Okay, cool. Well, just a reminder, leave us some good reviews on iTunes and some 5 stars. And joining us today, we do have a special guest to replace Shelley, and that's Allen.
Hey guys, how you doing? It's good to be here.
Allen, you may know as our camera guy who went with us on several trips to Hong Kong and Taiwan and the Philippines and the South China Sea. So thanks for joining us today, Allen.
Yeah, thanks for having us, having me.
The Royal Us.
The Royal Us, yes.
Allen is somewhat schizophrenic. It actually is kind of awkward because we have to pay each of the personalities.
Well, that's how you double dip, you know.
Yeah.
The economy's pretty rough right now.
Yeah, it's the insane that make out the best, as you can say with so many things. So besides being our occasional camera guy, what do you do? Tell the folks.
So right now, I run a small video production company. I say that to people, but it's really we do a bunch of YouTube channels. So a few of the channels we do, one is called Generation Tech. There's another one called Generation Films that covers more like sci-fi films, Star Wars. And then we have another side which does more like finance, business stuff. That's Credit Sifu and Business Sifu. So with that, I got my my hands full, really.
That sounds
so
right.
No more video production work for me for the time being, unfortunately.
Is this how you're telling us you're not going to work with us again?
No, you see, that's the thing. I'll work with you guys because, whenever I work with you guys, we end up going on crazy adventures.
Lots of danger.
And, that is the one thing in my life that I don't have enough, I think. I need more adventure.
Well, I just saw your video on Credit Sifu, which was you going to Thailand for $1,000, including airfare.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I hope the IRS isn't listening, but that was just an attempt to...
the IRS is our biggest fans.
Well, I didn't do this. Nothing I'm saying right now is on the record, but yeah, it was an attempt to just, have some business expenses I can write off.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Matt, legally speaking, is doing a podcast, is that on the record?
Oh, yeah, this is completely on the record.
No, well,
we are
guys,
not going to edit that out.
You guys don't know I'm here. Like, you can't prove that I'm here.
You're in front of us right now.
Yeah, but there's no video, man. I could be just a random guy.
An AI compiled
just a random guy with a beard off the street.
This is a deep fake right now.
Well, look, they're having what news organization? I read an article recently where they plugged the AI guy in and they started writing.
China's Xinhua News.
Maybe it wasn't a Chinese publication. I'm sure China's also doing this, but it was some American publication where like. They basically just fed him a bunch of the AI. I'm saying him already, but like they fed the AI some headlines, and it's just started recreating stories on its own. I'm like, oh wow, I thought creative.
What do you mean by recreating? You mean making up news?
Like making up news, yeah, exactly.
Like regular CNN journalists.
Oh well.
Oh, ba-doom.
You know the one thing. You guys remember that trip we had to? I forget it was our first trip to Hong Kong or our second one, and we were talking to one of the local CNN guys, and. I remember specifically when he was referring to American CNN, he said domestic, like to distance himself. Do you remember that?
No, I remember who you're talking about. I don't want to name his name.
We shouldn't name him, but I found that very interesting.
Yeah, actually, and I know I'm making a joke about CNN earlier, but that's the punchline. But there are a lot of good journalists at CNN that I've met.
No, sure, definitely.
And a lot of the individual journalists do try very hard to have good and accurate stories. Just so I am clear that.
I still watch CNN a lot. I'm kind of, I'm on the fence about it because like I love how everything has kind of just like gone everywhere, on YouTube, on the internet.
Wait, you love that?
I like that because it's like the democratization.
Oh, you mean
of
there's more voices?
Yeah, but I also having worked in the media with you guys for a little bit, like I understand there's like a lot of pressure right now, financial pressure. Like that's one of the reasons why. I left being a camera guy. I was like, I did my last freelance job last year. I started turning things down because I was like, look, man, automation is going to come from my job. You guys are just going to have drones flying around. They're going to continue cutting costs. So, I'm worried about traditional media disappearing because that's an avenue for trained journalists to go to. These are individuals, who have a training, they have a degree usually. And, there's a type of journalism that I think is missing sometimes from the internet.
Oh,
you know?
Walter Cronkite kind of.
Yeah, I mean, like, we definitely demonize journalists a lot, and they've done a lot of damage, I think, especially in the last few months. You had the Covington kids, right?
Yeah.
That was kind of scary, you know. Like, you had people coming out and doxing people.
Like big name people.
I mean, the good thing was I think a lot of journalists came out and apologized, and they're like, okay, you know, like, we got to take a step back. Once they
maybe we shouldn't have said let's all kill that kid.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's like a good sign. And then you obviously have
is that a good sign, or is that just like a basic like?
Well, no, it's a step back from the edge, and I think it's good that a lot of journalists recorrected themselves, because I think Matt's right. These are not bad people. A lot of them are professional. Like, you know, I've been in press pools and stuff. Like, they're usually good intentioned people, you know, but I think there's a lot of pressure to just get the story out.
Stuff.
Yeah, get the story out quick enough and sensationalize, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
because everyone's struggling to make money.
Yeah, and it's a good point about editors too. So there's a journalist from one of the mainstream media, and again, I don't want to name this, but I was having a conversation with her over dinner last year, and this reporter said to me that for all their regular stories, you know, they have an editor. Mm-hmm. But for any story that is China related, even if it's written in some other country, those stories have an additional layer of editorial. It has to go through their Beijing bureau to make sure it's not politically sensitive. And that's because that media is, like all the Western media that have a bureau in China, they're at risk of getting their bureau kicked out, or at risk of getting their website blocked in China, or whatever,
right.
And they fear those sort of unknown consequences of the Chinese Communist Party's influence, and so they just have to be super careful with that stuff. And it's a frustration to at least this one reporter.
Sure.
And I imagine to a lot of good reporters.
Well, the idea is, are you a rebel? Or are you going to just say, screw you guys, I'm going to do what I want, and you get kicked out? Or do you kind of remain in the system and still, you know, sometimes are able to report on things, you know, from a more clear point of view? You know, what if something like Tiananmen Square happens again? Yeah. You know what I mean? Then,
but it depends on your media. Yeah. Like I would say someone like Megha Rajagopalan, who worked for BuzzFeed and did a lot of excellent reporting on Xinjiang and the persecution of Uyghurs there.
Sure.
Like, she pushed the envelope. BuzzFeed let her, and then she got essentially kicked out of China by having her visa not renewed, which is the typical nice way they kick people out.
Yeah.
And her media basically supported her, but only, of course, up until the point when they're like, all right, well, if you're kicked out of China, we have to just move you to some other country. But I think that had she been working for, say, the New York Times or NBC, I think those editors might have said, don't go to Xinjiang at all, because we know what's going to happen to you and to us.
Well, I mean, there have been a lot of on-the-scene reporting from, like, Reuters, and I know a couple others, so...
is that through stringers, or are they're sending their own?
You know, I don't know how to make it. And
I
that's
feel
probably
like,
part of the thing.
vocals would be, you know, easier, right? I mean,
It's a lot of times when you're a foreign correspondent, like, you hire local stringers to help you, and you lead the reporting. What the challenge is there is that in China, a lot of times, even if, like, the worst that can happen to, say, me as a white American reporting in China is I get my visa forcibly not renewed or expired.
Okay.
And I have to leave. But the stringers that I've hired could actually be arrested.
Right.
And or their family members threatened and so on. And so that's a lot of times why, like, you need the stringers, but then you don't want to put people at risk. And this is one of the reasons why, like, you know, Chris, you and Shelley and I have talked before about hiring people in China to shoot some footage, but always it comes back to the risk is how much do you want to put people in danger to get the story? Mm-hmm. And for us, typically, that's not. Like, we don't want to do that to people. But it's a difficult balance, and there's no easy solution to that. And I think that, you know, yeah, the New York Times does sometimes have good reports on China, but a lot of times what you don't know about it is what the reporter learned that never made it into the article because the reporter knew it would be censored, or the editor cut it out, or the higher ups above the regular editor said don't include this part. And so you probably won't get outright criticism of the Chinese Communist Party. It might just be here are some facts on the ground, and here's what the authorities say in their response, and so on.
Why don't they just leak it to someone like you guys who have no chance of going into China anyway?
I don't know.
Yeah,
That's a good
why not?
question.
Secret, do some secret stuff, you know? Put it on a flash drive,
Well,
sneak it out of the country.
any reporter who's stationed in China, and if you would like to leak stories to us,
Yeah.
send us an email at ChinaUnscripted@gmail.com. We are here for you.
Now you're going to get a lot of crazy mail from the Chinese government, so good job with that.
Oh,
Yeah.
dear.
Don't click on anything for like a few weeks.
Yeah, well, a lot of the problems with like anonymous leaks that you see in the media, and like I'm all for anonymous reporting being allowed, but when you do that, you have like a real responsibility. And
To make sure that that's based on something.
right, because like a lot of times, like in the Judith Miller case about chemical weapons in Iraq, like she had this source that she protected and fed her this information, and it turned out that it was Scooter Libby who was worked with Dick Cheney, and the leak that she thought was this breaking news that she had the exclusive on was actually an intentional leak meant to push a very specific political agenda.
That
And of
there
course,
were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
right, which turned out to they never found the chemical and biological weapons that she had mentioned, or the weapons of mass destruction. And of course, none of this came out until much later.
Yeah.
But so that's an example, obviously, of anonymous reporting
Gone wrong.
But that's not to say that anonymous reporting is bad per se. It's just, I think that reporters have to be super careful. They have to really think about the nature of the leak. I mean, look at the Watergate scandal. They had a deep background anonymous source who was a legitimate leak, who didn't actually provide them information, though, just basically told them when they were on the right track or off the right track,
Right.
and told them to follow the money. I mean, we've all seen All the President's Men, so we kind of know how that goes. I'm too young to be alive during the Watergate scandal, but
Yeah. But, I mean, you see that today, too, like, because politicians know how to use media to their own advantage. And so, today, especially since the Trump presidency started, you see a lot of anonymous officials told us that. And, like, when that's what every single story is being based on, it gets to be a little dicey.
I mean, he's brilliant with how he's kind of maneuvering himself. Like, I mean, it's the thing that I have problems with is like a lot of people are like, oh, like he's planned everything. So like that's what I kind of wonder. Like,
People think
how
that,
much
like,
of
that
it,
Trump is doing the leaks or
well,
something?
no, I'm saying like how he kind of like from one viewpoint, you might say he's baiting the media actually to like kind of direct the course of the discussion in the country. Like I think some people people think it's all very like planned, and he like when he tweets something and suddenly he's dominating the news headlines, like he's doing it purposely, right? Like, or is it just him saying things off the cuff because that's who he is? So like I find that very interesting because he's a guy who comes from television, right? Like while everyone else ran a political campaign, he basically he created a persona.
he ran a trailer for his show, which was The Presidency.
I mean, do you think he maybe like created a character and then tried to test it in front of like sample audiences? I mean, is it that far to say that? Who knows?
I just want to remind everyone listening that Alan's opinions are his own,
Yeah, I
and
know.
we do not necessarily endorse them.
Like, I know I'm a little loose with Trump, like, but he's such an interesting person. Like, I don't think we've ever
That's
seen
true.
a president like him before, and he's really a president for the age we're living in right now, which is like kind of just insane. Everything is about social media. Everything is about the 24-hour news cycle. It's just like bam, 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 bam.
That's absolutely true.
And those of us in the media on all sides of the political spectrum are grateful that there's such an interesting president.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. I mean, to the degree that we're all just money hungry and want news, no matter whether it's important or not important. That there is news provided for us.
We can make our own news.
Yeah. We could just make stuff up.
Which we don't do, right?
Right. I'm not saying we make stuff up.
All right. It's come out. There's no such country as China. I'm sorry. It's all
Well, talking about that, you guys hear about the new? It's a new conspiracy theory. It goes beyond the flat Earth and what was the other one? The mountains are actually trees.
Trees are not real.
So there's one now that space isn't real.
really,
Which is the flat earthers are laughing at these guys. So I feel like a lot of this is started by trolls, right? I mean, it's not actually
possibly.
real stuff.
Well, but then sometimes you find somebody who really believes it. So space, there's no such thing as space.
There's no such thing. As
So
space.
are we living in a dome? Like what was that movie?
Oh, I didn't get that far, but yeah. What, Biodome?
Biodome.
Polly Shore.
Oh, no, you're thinking about the Truman Show.
Yeah,
right?
the Truman Show.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, we're all in a
But I
Truman
forgot
Show.
about
man.
Biodome. Oh man, Pauly Shore.
Yeah, what
it's
happened?
totally happening, buddy. Oh man,
Yeah.
the
The
90s,
90s were horrible.
Yeah.
They were. Now I was thinking about the Truman Show, and that in his case, space was not real.
Space was not real.
Well, no,
Yeah.
the space was real. Like eventually, you would reach outer space.
Right. So how does the no spacers, shall we call them?
I know. I just don't know, man. I heard this in passing. I was like, oh, this is cool.
So
But
you're
I
possibly
haven't-
just passing on fake news.
It could be fake news about fake conspiracies.
That could be.
They're
really
redirecting
gone
us
down the
from
rabbit
other
hole
things.
now.
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
heard there was for a while like a fake, like a troll thing where they were saying like flat earthers believe Australia doesn't exist.
Oh, okay.
And everyone you have met who says they're from Australia is actually a government agent. But apparently that was fake. Like that's not something
Okay.
flat earth.
I hope that's true because I used to live in Australia, and if that whole thing was a lie that I believed,
It was drugs injected into you by the government, Matt. The whole thing. You sit on a plane, the gas comes out, you go to sleep, you wake up with a whole bunch of memories, a little less blood, and maybe an organ or two less. And
that definitely seems like a more realistic thing than me actually living in Australia.
why?
I mean,
Oh,
it
you see,
could have
because I
been
was being
Arizona.
sarcastic, but maybe I should explain sarcasm to you.
I didn't pick it up. Well, I mean, one thing I want to bring up though is like Alan. A lot of people don't know this about you, but you're a real humanitarian.
Oh,
Yeah.
this.
You started an important movement called Humanity First. Tell
Yeah,
us
so
about
so
that.
this is on Generation Tech, and man, I've never really talked about this like outside of my persona on the show, which is like the xenophobic, I hate dolphins,
Which I get.
I hate machines. Basically, my whole what I realized was like YouTube, man, you guys read the comments. It's just like a really toxic wasteland, right? I mean, it's
I love our fans.
I mean, I love our fans too, but like sometimes you go through the comments and like if you read too many, man, you just become depressed. You're like, oh God, is this the world we're living in right now? Like, there's way too many Nazis, there's way too many crazies, just saying terrible things in the comments, and so one of the things I was like, well, like, where does this anger come from? Where does all this like negative emotion come from? And like, I think a lot of that has to do with there's something fundamentally wrong going on in our country, and I think it all goes to economic things.
Mm-hmm.
I think automation has played a huge role in really just like taking out huge swaths of jobs in the Midwest. Like, people talk about automation like, oh, it's going to come in like 20, 30 years. I think it's already here. Like, I saw it in my job as a camera guy.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a job called being you can be a steady cam operator, right?
Yeah.
This is a really physically grueling job. You had to go train yourself for like 2-3 years, buy tens of thousands of dollars of equipment. Now you have these electric gimbals, which basically motorize the whole process, and now you don't need any training or anything. You just come off the street and do it. And yeah, like technology has really, I think, eliminated a lot of jobs in the middle of the country. And on top of that, there's the Great Recession. That really affected my generation. I know a lot of my friends growing up, they don't have jobs. They're still at home, and they're kind of in a lot of pain right now because of that. And I feel like, I mean, this is all theories, but I feel like a lot of stuff I see on YouTube, because I know my demographic. The people who watch my show are basically me. In 20s to 30s, male, like 95% men.
That's
like,
you?
Women just find me they don't like me.
Really?
But
can't
so I was like, well, I understand where all this anger and hate is. Like, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the media right now. Like, everyone is basically attacking each other. There's like a lot of identity stuff going on, and I'm like, well, like I understand where all this hate is, so let's take this hate and let's kind of redirect it at something,
channel into something useful.
Yeah, something useful, like like.
So go after the dolphins.
Dolphins.
Look, we're all jealous of their superior intellect.
Well, yeah, they're the second most intelligent, right? I think they.
I thought octopi.
Octopi
were very smart.
It's not octopuses.
Octopussy.
Octopussy.
That was a James Bond movie.
No, that was a James Bond character.
Right.
In a James Bond movie.
Yeah. So yeah, the idea is like, hey, let's play up the thing that let's play up the humanity first thing. Let's play up this whole idea that we're all humans. We should be watching out for each other. We shouldn't be fighting each other. But at the same time, I recognize like the anger. Like I see what's going on in the news every day, and it does scare me, and it makes me worried. And I'm like, well, if we're going to redirect this anger at something, let's redirect it now at aliens. I mean, hopefully they don't come, because if they do come, they're probably going to target me, and that'll be very bad.
A very bad movement.
I'm just kind of betting. I'm just kind of gambling on the fact that they won't come in my lifetime, hopefully.
They're already here, Alan.
Well, actually, I read this article that this is an interesting theory that like the reason we haven't seen aliens yet is we're actually the most advanced species in our quadrant of the galaxy.
Oh.
So, good news, that means we'll probably develop spaceflight before any other sentient beings in the nearby area.
So
and we will be
the aliens.
We will be the conquering, which to me is okay for now. Like, look, when we meet aliens, if that ever happens, then we'll deal with, like how we treat them and everything like that. For now, let's try to fix the problems here on Earth. But so anyway, so it's kind of like it's a little of a gag joke. This is to anyone from Generation Tech or films listening. Like, I don't want you guys to go out there and kill dolphins. Please don't do that.
What about aliens?
Don't kill aliens either. But it's more. I want people to focus more on the humanity first part, and that's really the important part.
In some ways, it's like a very pure form of racism.
Yeah, no, it is a xenophobic hate group, really, and it's just bizarre because I mean, you know me, like I love trolling people. I love just finding interesting ways of messing with people, and this is just like kind of a positive way. I mean, but so the interesting thing is, like a week ago, I was watching the Joe Rogan podcast, and this guy came on. His name is Andrew Yang, right? He's like a 44-year-old Taiwanese American, and he's running for Democrat. He's going to be running in the Democrat primary. I think he declared like last year or something like that. And he's running on a universal base income.
But he stole your slogan.
Well, that's the thing. So I was like, okay, this guy's interesting. Like I've heard a lot of conservative pundits actually talk about UBI, which is kind of where I'm like, oh, okay, that's kind of interesting. That's not something you would hear a conservative really saying, like basically wealth redistribution, right? I mean, that's kind of what the UBI is, at least from my basic understanding. So I looked into this guy a little more because he's really interesting. He was talking about a lot of issues that I kind of felt like was affecting a lot of automation problems, a lot of job loss issues. So I looked at his website, and there it is right there in the center, humanity first. I'm like, whoa.
But it's not a reference to your thing?
I don't think so.
You don't think he watched Generation Tech and then took your slogan?
I doubt it. I think humanity first is something that is just like an obvious thing, isn't it? That's like the development. Like that's the time we're living in. Like there's this interesting thing I like to talk about all the time. It's there's somewhere around like 400-500 humans who have left Earth. Since we've developed the fake space program. You
mean like permanently?
No, like they've gone into space.
They've gone like past the stratosphere or whatever, like into
So they viewed,
inner space.
The most important part is they viewed Earth from space. Mm-hmm. And, most people go into space when they come back, they get medical checkups, right? And a lot of them actually talk to psychologists. And what these psychologists started noticing was that their worldview started changing. It's something they call the overview effect. And it's like a cognitive shift where they begin seeing the domestic and international issues we have here on Earth as less important and kind of almost silly. Because, these are people going up there and they're viewing Earth as just one organism, one little spear just protected by a thin layer of ozone, right? Yeah. Unless it's a flat disk, and I don't know what that would be.
Well, I mean, all these people are liars.
So they're all liars, and but
there's no such thing as space.
No, but the thing is, these people, they go up there and they see it, and they start realizing, like, wow, we have bigger things to worry about, than just
like the aliens.
Like the aliens. No, like what if an asteroid hits us? I don't know.
Well, yeah.
I mean, the thing is, they become, I think, less emotionally attached to international politics, domestic politics. They start, and I think once you become less emotional about these things, you become less tribal. I mean, you're able to, rationalize how you view certain situations, and I think that's what ends up being like the best way of participating in a democracy. Right?
Well, unless you become super tribal and just the tribe is humanity.
Right. Okay.
Against everything else in the universe.
Yeah, I can see the flaw in humanity first.
Well, no,
Yeah,
I agree with this.
Without an enemy,
like
it will fall apart.
So this is beautiful. I think this is a beautiful form of racism.
Yeah,
And, I think
it's not racism.
It is the human race.
Well, I tell people this. I'm like, well, first of all, I'm. This might be a little controversial, but I don't really see I don't see you and me as different races. I think we're human. I mean, yeah, we're the human race.
Yeah.
So like, I don't understand this. Oh, you're Asian, you're black, you're white. I mean, I know a lot of people say that. Like a lot of racist people kind of say this in order to just not make it an issue that we discuss. But I really think that like if you look at it scientifically, like our DNA variances are very small, like minimal. So.
I mean, my eyes are open. Like I always considered myself not to be a racist because I felt like that.
Right.
But I realized really, I am just an extreme racist.
No, well, I mean, what we like
my
to say,
race is the best race in the universe.
Well, what I like,
human race.
what I like to say
Human race.
for humanity first is we're speciest. We're not racist.
I think
Yeah.
either can be
Yeah.
used. I mean, like it's not that I hate aliens. I don't want to live with them.
Yeah.
They should be, in
I mean,
their own
you haven't met them yet,
neighborhoods
though.
and planets.
You haven't met them yet.
I'm sure there's a few good ones.
Yeah.
But I mean,
We're not talking about immigrants, are we?
illegal aliens.
Oh, okay. Okay. Jesus Christ, man. So a buddy of mine, the guy I work with on one of our channels, Generation Films, his name is Ben, not the Ben you guys know.
Okay.
We have two Bens. We have a British Ben, which is Brent Hedges. He's never been on China Uncensored, has he?
I don't know.
He did the voiceover for the lifestyles of the rich and corrupt or whatever.
If you recognize that, you're a true fan.
Yeah, that's a.
I remember that.
I'm not even sure I'm getting the name. If you're a true fan, you'll know what the actual name of that segment was.
Rousing the Rich and Corrupt.
Yeah, it was something like that. We just needed a British voice, and Ben.
He doesn't have a very British accent anymore.
Yeah, but we asked him to play it up a bit.
Well, no, I asked him. I pointed at the rear end of the car the other day. I'm like, "What is that?" And he goes, "It's a trunk." I'm like, "No, man, it's a boot. It's a boot. Boot? That's Canadian.
Boot.
A boot.
It is a boot.
Right. Anyway, so yeah, he's not. But we have him. We call him British Ben because we have another Ben. He's called American Ben, and American Ben has really, he's really bought into the humanity first thing, and he's talking about writing a manifesto. And like now I'm a little
Only
worried.
the best things have manifestos.
Yeah, because now I'm a little worried because like, all right, well, like I don't want anyone like committing acts of violence in the name of this movement. Because
I mean that's what you've started.
I mean, like, it's populist forever. That's what I'm kind of digging into, and it's fun. It's fun until it gets too serious. But
until we find another alien race, and then suddenly it's.
But I mean, I love our core Generation Tech fans. They're like really cool people. They're like really nice, rational people. So I think they're all in on the joke, more or less. Maybe there's like one or two dudes who are swimming around, with spears trying to kill dolphins. But I'm gonna disassociate myself from that. Yeah.
I mean, because it's not a very efficient way to kill dolphins is the main issue.
What, you saying like dynamite or something?
No, slowly poisoning the oceans with pollution.
Oh, with plastic. Just buy more plastic bags.
Just buy tuna fish, I mean, it's easy.
Unsafe tuna.
Right.
I don't think you can even get that anymore.
I'm sure you
dolphin.
I don't think they market it as that. It's just the cheaper
for
tuna.
39 cents a can.
Like anti-dolphin.
Taste the dolphin. Well, dolphins rape people, don't they?
They rape other dolphins, though.
I mean, there is
that too.
Well, there's actually a case that I think it's because of their high intelligence. They are kind of one of the more messed up creatures in the ocean and on land. I mean, they do rape. Yeah, I mean, like the male dolphins sometimes will gang rape female dolphins.
That's not cool.
And I'm not generalizing, guys. I'm not saying all dolphins do this. I'm just talking about individuals who have happened to have done this.
Hashtag not all dolphins.
Hashtag not all dolphins. Right. Yeah.
Well, that's terrifying. So
so stay out of the water, man. Like, we are land animals, and I think we do better on land.
I think Jaws was funded by a dolphin to get people to focus on the wrong thing.
Yeah. Well, hey, look, give the dolphins a million years, man. If they can adapt.
I'm not going to give them a million
Well,
years.
give them a million years. They can,
I'm not.
they'll start taking over the underground. I mean, we're pouring a lot of crazy stuff in the water. Maybe that'll speed up the evolution. You know,
From what I've seen from movies and comic books,
If you
exposure to
add
radiation.
no, yeah. I mean, we're
Yeah.
training
Definitely
dolphins.
they'll become mutant ninjas, I believe.
Oh, speaking of exposure to radiation, one of my favorite memories of us working together was on a flight to. This is you'll recognize where this is going. We were on a flight to Hong Kong,
Okay.
and we watched Terraform Mars.
Oh, okay. I was like,
Oh man, that movie.
I was like, did you take me on a job and not telling me about like radiation danger, dude? Like,
Well, I mean that trip in the South China Sea, you know.
well, they say airplanes, you do get exposed to some bad radiation up there.
I've heard that.
Yeah.
I actually think the South China Sea trip was like I felt so clean in a lot of ways.
I had a cough for like
Because-
2 weeks, and then after spending 3 days with you guys, my lungs were just cleared up.
Because it was like 3 full days essentially on a fishing boat,
right.
and like the air was clean. Like we didn't even you couldn't even really read because it was like up and down. You just kind of like sit there and like talk and
We
like
were a
look at
bunch
the
of
ocean.
landlubbers.
Well, the interesting
Yeah,
thing is,
but it was just very relaxing.
yeah, I mean, I get terrible motion sickness, and Shelley threw up first. I threw up second.
Yeah,
but
that's
after
right.
I threw up, by the second or third day, dude, I was like, I had my sea legs. I was reading a book, like on a
I saw
a
you doing
rocky
some
boat.
editing. Even.
Yeah, I was editing. I'm like, wow, so sea legs is a thing. Like you get them pretty quickly. Yeah.
So if you don't know what we're talking about, this was back in 2016 when China and the Philippines were really having a heated territorial dispute over the Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea. So we went to the Philippines and hired a Filipino fisherman to take us on his boat to this disputed territory. And
He thought we were a little nuts. Why would you want to go there? And
where there's the Chinese Coast Guard.
Yeah.
And they have attacked Filipino fishermen previously.
but yeah, so that was
that was a cool time.
a great trip.
That is not something you typically do on a normal vacation.
I also like that we actually got out and stood on the Scarborough Shoal, and the water was about waist deep.
It was a little disappointing. I thought it'd be bigger. You know.
The Scarborough Shoal?
Yeah.
Well, the shoal was big.
Yeah.
It was just that it was all like a couple feet underwater because it was high tide.
Yeah.
Well, it
So we
also
couldn't
looked
really
like
see
the
it.
reef was dead, and like there are reports of China like poisoning reefs so they can eventually build on it.
Why can't you just build on a living reef? You're just going to put
Because
sand on it anyway.
you'll have air pockets.
Oh, I see.
Probably. I don't know.
So
How
that
do I know
sounded
that?
good.
Yeah, no, that's just nonsense. I mean, I really buy into that. It's not about what you say; it's how you say it.
The confidence.
Yeah.
Kind of like how if you walk into a place in a suit, you can do anything.
I thought you were gonna go with the bank robbing scenario. For some reason, I thought walk into a
It's-
bank.
It's like that movie, The Old Man and the Gun. I don't know if you guys saw that.
oh,
It's-
Robert Redford.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And I saw that with my dad.
Okay.
Because
That's a
like
cool-
Robert Redford and my dad are like the same age. I thought he'd like to see it.
Yeah.
He's just like he basically wears a nice suit, very charming, wears a hat and the traditional hat, and just goes into a bank, is very polite to the teller, and says, I've got a gun. Please put your money in here, and he gives the teller a big smile, and they do what he says, and he walks out. And it's just like whoa, you can get away with so much.
Someone's gonna copycat that.
I mean, it's an old movie, so if it was going to happen, it had
Oh,
happened.
it was they redid a movie. You're saying
It was
that's
it was a movie based on a true story, a real person who robbed a number of banks. And I guess
okay,
it was
okay.
like the 70s or something. It was before all the security measures were put in place.
sure.
Where it was easier to rob a bank.
It was very easy. Nowadays, robbing a bank, typically you only get a few thousand in cash,
Right.
and you'll be caught almost immediately because the amount of surveillance is very high.
Yeah.
The vaults are often on 15-minute timers. So if you ever try to get into a vault in the bank, they're like, "Oh, sorry, like you got to wait for 15 minutes, and you just have to sit there."
Yeah.
But they're all programmed like that, so there's no way a teller could actually do it. Under
That's why
duress.
the guys in Point Break were smart.
Well, shouldn't you just hack nowadays? Isn't that the best way? Just like hack
There's a
money?
variety of better ways to make money.
There's so many-
these days.
I mean, we live in the surveillance state now. I mean, not really, but like if you go into any major city in the United States right now, like if you commit a crime in a downtown area, you're kind of and especially in the street, you're just an idiot. You're just,
That's
like,
why there's no CSI in New York, because like people just get caught immediately.
yeah, it's not as interesting. Well, like the Jesse Smollett
Yeah, I was
thing,
gonna
it was
bring
like
that
it's like
up.
they were able to like retrack their entire thing. Like there was like a 30-minute gap where he wasn't on the camera, but that's like crazy. You didn't have that like
Yeah.
you didn't have that like even 5 or 10 years ago. Well,
Well,
maybe 10
there's
years ago.
the sort of tip of the spear for surveillance is, and we should talk about this because this is actually the China Unscripted podcast, is in first-tier Chinese cities, Beijing and Shanghai. The amount of surveillance is insane, and they have about 200 million surveillance cameras across the country now. But what they want is, what was it, like 3 billion by 2030? What was the statistic?
Basically 2 cameras per person in China.
Yeah. Wow, so it's like instead of guns, they're going with the cameras thing. Like because in America, it's like 1 gun per person. So.
It's not. I forget exactly what the statistic. I think it's like 1 per 17.
So this is what China. This is why China is building an AI, because they're going to have crazy amounts of data to sort through.
Well, yes, that is a big part.
So they have like sense nets. What is that? No,
that was a company we talked about in Xinjiang. Well, they do have Skynet.
Sense Face, I think, is the name of one.
It's
of
called
their...
Sense Face.
They have really like awkward names sometimes.
I mean, this probably sounds better in Chinese.
Sense
right?
Face. It can't possibly sound worse. It's basically software that'll sort through terabytes of data and figure out what are the faces and then match up the faces. And
it's facial recognition.
You can track the movements of any individual throughout the entire course of a day, no matter where they go in a city like Chongqing, and it's just like they're tracked the whole time. And if you set the AI up to track a person in real time, it'll do it. Or you can go back through history and track where they were on, April 2nd, 2018. Once the cameras are there, it's good.
Yeah, and that reminds me of what we recently heard in Xinjiang, where another company called Sense Nets.
Also a great name.
What's with sense? Why sense? Like sensory?
I think they were like fans of The Sixth Sense.
I think their naming scheme just lacks common sense.
Oh, okay.
Ooh, no, I don't even want to share the story anymore.
They also have the social score now, right? Whereas, like, if you've committed a crime or you have bad credit, you can't even go into the central tiers or like use public transport, right?
It's a little more complicated than that because it's not like there's a single program. It was like kind of a vague government directive, and then a bunch of different companies, some state-backed, some private, tried to create their own version of what a social credit system would look like.
Okay.
So it's not quite as it is not the crazy 1984 surveillance thing that it's often described as in the West.
Okay.
Because China already has that crazy 1984 surveillance system anyways. This is just another thing that's already tapping into the pre-existing surveillance system.
Yeah, but there is I actually read an article in the National Post called it says China's Orwellian social credit system blocked 17.5 million people from buying airline tickets last year. And
were they all Uyghurs? Probably a lot of Uyghurs.
Well, it's just like anyone who has a social credit problem, but they can just blacklist your name from buying airline tickets. And granted, you could say, oh, well, America does it too. We have a no-fly list. And that's true, but
it's different how you get on that list.
Right.
Yeah.
You're suspected of being a terrorist. In China, it's you're suspected of being either against the Communist Party or having a low quality credit, like financial credit, or just a whole variety of things, or it could be even your family and friends potentially.
Or in the case of the Uyghurs, they'll just say you're terrorists.
Right.
It's interesting. Didn't the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia just go visit Beijing recently?
Yeah. I'm not sure. I haven't heard that.
Yeah, I think I read about it, and I just wonder what they're obviously doing terrible things to Muslims out there, right? They're re-educating them, forcing. Is it true they're forcing them to eat bacon? Because that's just some messed up.
I have heard that.
There are reports of some
right
people
there,
being forced to eat pork and drink alcohol, which are both forbidden by halal tradition, but I'm not sure how widespread it is, or if it was just a few cases.
Well, there also is the instance that they have Han Chinese people going into Xinjiang and staying with Uyghur families.
Yeah.
And one of the things that they're trained in, the Han Chinese people, is they're supposed to keep their eye out to see if these people are potentially terrorists. Oh. So one of the things is they bring a bag of meat and make dumplings.
Okay.
And it's are they very concerned about it being pork? Well, then they might be, a terrorist.
They might have beliefs.
That's interesting you say, because my uncle and aunt actually just recently, they're from Shanghai. They actually went on one of these trips, and they did it through a photography club. And what they do is they go over there and they bring clothing and like use because they're like really poor. The Uyghurs out there, like
so they actually went to Xinjiang.
Yeah, so the whole thing is they have this photography club, and like dude, like Asians and their cameras, man, we love taking photos, and for them it's like social cred to go out there and get like these awesome shots. It's just like Instagram here in the States, like, oh man, I went to Uyghur territory, and so they stay in these places, and like the people are lovely. Like, because I'm sure most Uyghurs are probably really lovely people, and they're just trying to get along.
Well, they also don't want to be reported to the central authorities as well.
Right, but no, the thing is, they actually really like this specific photo group because they bring in like clothing and like books for their schools and stuff. I don't know if they're being talked to. Like, I'm not saying I don't believe you, but I'm just saying like, it's interesting you say that because like the way I hear them talk about it is like, they're just like it's not very Chinese there at all. It's Central Asia. It's like completely different culture, completely different. Yeah. Like, it's kind of crazy if you think about it.
Right. Well, I mean, a lot of ways it's more like Kazakhstan or Tajikistan.
Exactly. Yeah.
And like for a while historically, like for some parts of history, that area was part of Chinese rule, like the late Qing dynasty. Part of it was sometimes part of Russian rule. Yeah. Sometimes it was kind of not really overseen by anybody except the local tribes and so on. So they've got all these influences there along the ancient Silk Road went right through Xinjiang. Yeah. And there's all these different
road goes through it today.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's interesting. So like back with like Saudi Arabia going to visit, like it's not a lot of the traditional Middle Eastern leaders are saying much about what's going on to the Uyghurs, right? Or even the Rohingyas in Burma. There's more of a concentration, obviously, on like Israel and Palestine, it seems, and like when it comes to like
I was just thinking about who stood up for the Muslims in Xinjiang and the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar.
It was Turkish, right, or something?
No, it was actually Vice President Mike Pence.
Mike Pence, okay.
And like you're just like, wait, what? But like for him, he's a deeply religious man.
Yeah.
So like for him, it's like if you're persecuted for your beliefs, it doesn't matter because like he surely, as a man of Christian faith, surely doesn't believe that Islam is equally true to Christianity.
Sure.
But I get the sense that he believes that if you persecute people for their beliefs, then people then don't have a chance to find what the true belief is, which in his view would be belief in Jesus. And so, like, actually, what's interesting is that makes him very concerned about people of all faiths.
Sure.
And I think that's actually really admirable. It's just that you just don't expect this kind of thing to come from
Mike Pence,
or just the White House in general. It just seems unusual because so few U.S. Administrations have allowed anyone in the administration to be quite as outspoken about human rights as the current administration. And even though Trump isn't talking about human rights, as far as I know, having the VP do it is very interesting, and it's quite groundbreaking.
It's probably a personal thing for him.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he seems like a devoutly religious man.
And meanwhile, China is like actively supporting terrorist groups in Pakistan.
Right. Well, giving them weapons, munitions, right?
And also, actively, I forget the guy's name, but Matt, do you remember the name of the organization? Like the Hashish something or another? You don't?
Hashish something? No, I'm not sure.
Well, there's a guy in Pakistan that's generally seen as like the leader of a major terrorist organization there.
Is he a part of the government or is he in opposition?
I don't think so.
He isn't, okay.
But China has used its position in the UN to block that label.
Oh, okay. But like China is deeply involved with the Pakistani military, so they're playing both sides here.
Yeah, but did you know that actually a lot of Islamic terrorists are actually deeply influenced by early communist writings?
No, I didn't know.
So it's actually
isn't that like kind of exactly the opposite you would think? Like,
well, you would think, right? Because it's like, atheism, communism, religion, Islam. But like a lot of the tactics, because if you consider like terrorist organizations, typically, the vast majority of terrorists, more than 90% of the victims of terrorist attacks are other Muslims in Muslim countries.
Sure.
They're typically not going after, Americans, even though it seems very shocking to us when these incidents do happen. They're actually kind of rare, and most terrorist attacks in the U.S. are not actually Muslim terrorists. Yeah. But in Muslim countries, they're really concerned about Muslim terrorists. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them
they just call it terrorism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or extremist and Q-tip, I think if I'm saying the name right, was one of the early early 20th century Islamist thinkers who sort of started a lot of terrorist ideology. Who he read Marx, he read Lenin. He was kind of influenced by this idea of using class struggle to struggle against other Muslims who didn't share the beliefs.
You get that Sunni Shia split kind of too.
Right. And so it's basically taking, because it doesn't make sense, right, from an outsider who, I haven't read the Quran. I'm not that familiar with the tenets of Islam, but to me, you see Sunni Shia, obviously they're different.
Right.
But why is it that they feel they have to kill each other? Because these ideas of class struggle have been exacerbated. And that idea, think about the terrorist attacks against, against the U.S.
Yeah.
9/11. Let's just make the assumption that it is what the government says it is. Mm-hmm. That it was a Muslim terrorist attack. But what did it achieve? It didn't make the world better for Muslims. It didn't make the world better for Americans. It didn't make it better for anyone. All it did was exacerbated hatred and conflict.
Sure.
And this is a tactic that you see used again and again in Soviet Union, in China, where you get groups to fight each other, but it's not over something productive like, I want your land or your cows or even political power. Mm-hmm. It's just struggle, because that allows, when you get other groups struggling, then you create opportunities for yourself to gain more power and resources.
Well, I actually think, I got to do a little more reading about what you're saying, but I do think that there was a clear goal behind 9/11. And it was really to just weigh down America, right? Look how large our security apparatus has grown. Look at how big our deficit has grown. We got how many? Was it $3 trillion in just the last 2 years, right?
Yeah. Well, you know that book Unrestricted Warfare by those two Chinese generals that came out in the 90s. They had some suggestion in there about if there were an attack on New York, it would have this kind of effect. And I'm not saying that China was behind 9/11.
Sure.
But at the time in China, there was a lot of delight at what happened, and this kind of feeling of America got what it deserved. And there's even a state-run Beijing news documentary called Attack America that basically said something like, this is the America we have all wanted to see. Blood debts have been repaid in blood. Mm-hmm. And this very anti-American sentiment that was echoed by a lot of people in China.
Okay.
Because of the propaganda, just this idea, this enemy gets attacked, and you feel like that's good, even though these are civilians that were killed in 9/11. These aren't enemy combatants by any definition.
Well, yeah, a lot of people definitely hate America, and you're right. I think who really won from the war in the Middle East? It was China. Because China had unrestricted growth during that whole entire period where we were just running.
And right before 9/11, the U.S. government was beginning to have a shift in focus towards the Asia Pacific, particularly China. And that completely got derailed and didn't even go back to looking at China till towards the end of the Obama administration.
Trillions of dollars and 15 years later.
Yeah.
Finally
I don't think
shifting.
I just want to say I don't think there's a connection though between China or
is China behind 9/11? I kind of doubt that.
No,
I don't think there's any evidence to support that.
But going back to you're saying that a lot of the modern, fundamentalism. You're saying the modern fundamentalist movement, like the new muftis, in Saudi Arabia.
ISIS, Al Qaeda, they're influenced by some of this communist thought.
Yeah, if you actually look, if you look at the Muslim Brotherhood, right? This is kind of the one of the root organizations that helped inspire Hamas and Al Qaeda. They really focus a lot on social programming, kind of helping the community out. The mosque, just other religious institutions gave out food, gave out medical care, education. So there is that kind of, I guess you can connect that with communism in some way, right? It's providing services for people.
I don't know if I would describe that as what communism is about. That's something they say they do, but in reality, if you look at the Soviet Union or China, it's more about tactics to amass power.
Yeah. That's interesting. Well, I mean, there is one case where I think I think any kind of government system can work in small scale. Like if you have it, to a so one example would be like the kibbutzes in Israel, right? Like I mean, these were actually as close as pure communism as you could get in real practical life, because we've never had actual communism right in play, just impossible. But like these kibbutzes in the early days of Israel were basically everyone shared everything. Like all the kids were put into like nursery schools together. Everyone basically worked the fields together. They didn't own anything. But what you naturally saw as Israel became more developed, the security issues less of an issue. A lot of these kibbutzes transitioned to more of like private ownership and everything like that. But for a while, it actually kind of worked in that one specific circumstance. So I find interesting,
Yeah, I don't know. Like I do know a guy who like grew up in a kibbutz.
Yeah.
And, like,
No,
he
it's
doesn't
mixed.
speak highly of it.
No,
Yeah,
some
I've
people
definitely
hate it.
heard like very mixed reviews. Like definitely there's people who loved it.
Yeah.
And I think typically the smaller ones were better from what I've heard
Yeah.
from some of my Israeli friends.
Well,
But
what made a kibbutz successful usually is that they had some kind of industrial capability, some kind of product that they could actually sell to the outside world. At the end of the day, they still needed to generate, enough money that they could share collectively. Now, I'm not supporting communism. I'm just saying, this is one case where, at least on a small scale.
right. Well,
seems to
but
function.
it's also
Yeah.
a little different than like if you look at communism from the perspective of Marx and Engels, which is the forcible overthrow of the existing class structure through violent revolution, and that's what when people like Vladimir Lenin were in his October Revolution for the Soviet Union, that was like communism in the sort of purest Marxist sense is a violent, forcible overthrow of the existing ruling class. And so what you had in a kibbutz is a community that's working together
Right.
by choice,
Right.
not they killed the landlords and took their stuff.
Sure.
So I don't know if I would even call it like there's some elements you could say are the sharing part of it, but it's a voluntary program.
Sure.
And,
Definitely.
And it's people coming together to share stuff on a very small scale and not killing the rich people.
Yeah, I mean, there is a difference between like the very traditional form of communalism that like small tribes and small villages would always engage in. But when it's a nation state kind of level.
Well, it's that idea of redistribution of wealth, right? Like, I mean, I think a lot of conservatives find it immoral to literally just take money away from people, right? Like, it is money that we have earned, we've worked hard for, and I kind of like now that we're kind of in this area, I want to go back to this whole UBI thing, because I'm kind of curious to hear what you guys think about it, because I haven't really made my own mind about it. Back to this Andrew Yang guy, who's running for president. It's just like I heard him talk a lot about. First of all, what I really liked about this guy was he wasn't very emotional. He wasn't very political. I mean, he was just coming with figures and numbers, and he was explaining to us like in 10 years, most major think tanks are quoting somewhere around 20 to 30% job loss. So like these are very scary numbers for the United States, and like his idea, of course, is we need to somehow make sure that these people who are going to lose their jobs and stay basically unemployed, they have a way to take care of themselves. Because, like once unemployment reaches kind of a large number, you're going to just have instability in society, right? I mean, it's a pretty big issue,
Yeah. Well, UBI doesn't solve the employment issue, but it does provide a certain sort of minimal safety net.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well,
Hypothetically.
I think that when the program begins, it basically would do that. Although actually the amount he proposed was $1,000 a month is very low.
Right. I mean, that's the thing. Most people, I think, when you hear UBI, you think, oh, this is a job replacement program. But the way he seems to say
it's a small supplement.
Right, exactly.
But here's the thing. I think that the point he makes, which I think is is a good point is that it would be a replacement for other entitlement programs such as Social Security and welfare and food stamps.
So
and
the idea is that you give the person the same equivalent of money that they have to decide.
I don't think he specifically said he's going to defund Social Security.
No, he said people were going to get the option to take either the UBI or what they're currently getting. But here's, I think, the merit behind that argument, which is one of the problems with welfare and food stamps, not Social Security, but welfare and food stamps, is that if you work, then your benefits decrease. So you're de-incentivized to work, or you're incentivized to work at jobs that are under the table cash.
Sure.
For example, including selling drugs. And so from that perspective, if everyone who's currently getting welfare and food stamps, suddenly it was an unconditional amount of money, more of those people would be incentivized to work. And on top of that, you eliminate a lot of the bureaucracy. So you actually save money doing it that way. And I think that's why, just from the perspective of replacing those current programs with a simple UBI, Universal Basic Income, it's actually more efficient and more fair and encourages people to work more. That doesn't mean that it's actually an overall good idea.
Yeah, no, the UBI part is really the part of his campaign where I just don't really understand enough, But I think the issues that he's talking about, like, generally are important, and we don't hear a lot of politicians talk about. For instance, the job unemployment rate, right? It's somewhere at 4%, 4.9, and if you watch all the business news channels, are all like, wow, everyone was wrong. The American economy is doing really well, but if you look at actual Americans engaging in the job market, it is quite low. I don't know what the stats are specifically, but I think it was somewhere in the 60% range. So somewhere.
No, that was his statistic, but I don't think that's actually the employment, which you normally, I forget what it is.
Well, no, engagement in the actual, a lot of people have just basically given up, and just from anecdotal evidence, I guess, was not really there. But I do notice that a lot of my friends have kind of just given up. There are a lot of people just living at home now.
I remember that was actually something Trump spoke about on the campaign trail.
Well, I think a lot of the reasons why, people say, oh, Trump won because people are racist and voting for him, but I think that he targeted a demographic in America that was just clearly underrepresented. We all live in the city, right? But if you've ever gone to the middle of the country, you got a lot of these secondary, tertiary cities are just falling apart, and on top of that, you have the opioid epidemic and all these other different things. It's not good, right?
Right.
One of the stats I think he said that was really interesting was that I think from 2005 to 2015, 95% of jobs created were non-traditional, as in gig jobs, part-time jobs, as in jobs that don't have really benefits, no security net, as you're saying, and we've noticed that since the recession, right, we're seeing our GDP increase more and more, but at the end of this year, we saw major companies like Activision post major best sales numbers in their history, but at the same time they'll lay off 800 people. So I think corporate consolidation is really what's driving a lot of our economic growth. Whereas if you actually look at the job market, what you have are a lot of high-end jobs that might not necessarily have the proper candidates, and then you have a lot of people who are also unemployed because their skills no longer fit the existing market we're in, right?
Yeah, well, I think, though, that economically speaking, just in my opinion, the best way to deal with the unemployment is to figure out measures to stimulate small business.
Okay.
Because roughly 2/3 of all people in the U.S. are employed in small businesses. And even though we think about these, the Amazons and so on, and the Googles and so on, being these giant corporations, and it's true, they are. And they do provide a lot of jobs, and some of them are good jobs, and some of them are not that good of jobs. But it's actually small businesses that are the driving factor. And I think that, ever since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, 150 plus years ago, there's been a concern that, these machines will replace our jobs.
Sure.
And it's true that machines do replace jobs. But what happens is that inevitably, as long as you're in a market economy where people are incentivized to innovate,
Right.
then new jobs are created. And if you have a competitive market that's encourages competition and encourages innovation, then you will have a greater number of new jobs that we haven't even imagined. Like app
Sure.
developers was not a job that was available 20 years ago.
Well, let's talk about, for instance, higher education, right? Like, so tuition costs have gone crazy. I know, Chris, like, you know, you've talked to me about this a lot of the times, and I know a lot of people who have like, you know, huge student loans, and like, so how has college tuition increased so much in the last like decade, right? 2 decades.
Administrators.
So like, you're creating jobs. But are these jobs actually necessary, or are we just creating jobs for the sake of it? And like,
Well, no, but
I
the
look
reason universities have more administrative jobs is because universities have more students with more money.
right,
And part of that is international students, but a big part of it is also students can now get student loans so easily
right.
that more people are going to college. And so the budgets go up for the universities, and so they can hire more people. And so they have more administrators, and so the costs go up.
But I remember like going to college, and I remember the portals I used, the internet services that they had. I mean, it was terrible. Like, you know, like you don't think we can streamline a lot of these colleges by cutting down their administration staff and basically automating a lot of these jobs, and then we'll have cheaper tuition because what is it? Like
What do you mean, but how do you propose that happens? Like
Well-
someone just tells colleges to do it and they do it? Like there has to be a market incentive for them to do
exactly
it.
a market incentive. And right now, I mean, what if we take away grants? What if we say, like, we're not going to give you guys you know, all these scholarships. We're not going to fund these ridiculous tuition amounts. I mean, we're talking about like $40,000 a year for a liberal arts degree. I mean, that's crazy, dude. Like, come on.
Yeah. But also, not everyone necessarily needs that degree. Like, I think,
but well, what do we tell our kids now? What do people? I mean, like I come from, you know, the Northeast, and I know in my town, I remember people like, if you didn't go to college, people look down on you. You know, it's a toxic environment, but that's just what it is in America right now.
Well,
And
no, I don't know. I mean, my dad, who's like a Yale Law School graduate,
Sure.
he said to me when I was 17, he said, if you don't want to go to college, you don't have to go, and
Yeah.
you'll figure it out.
Your dad was a smart man.
And I won't pressure you to go. And I ended up taking a year off before going to college just to make sure it was something I really wanted to do.
Also very smart.
Yeah, but like, I think my dad also was very much in favor of trade schools because and I would even put computer programming as a trade school category, because I think that people who want to take certain types of jobs working in industries that are largely automated, like auto manufacturing is largely automated.
Sure.
You need to be very computer literate. You need to know computer programming, but you're not a full-on coder necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
But I think like a 1-year or 2-year trade school, just like they have for plumbing,
Sure.
you could be very competent. You could be trained to get the new types of jobs that come out.
Yeah.
And by treating it as a trade school, it's going to be more efficient. You're not going to waste your money on other types of courses and stuff that really aren't going to be that useful for you.
Yeah, it's funny to talk about coding. There's this whole learn to code controversy thing going on, right? Like, you guys know about this? Like, some guys on Twitter got banned for this when...
Yeah, after BuzzFeed laid off a bunch of people.
Yeah, that's messed up. I hate, like, you can hate someone, but you shouldn't make fun of them for losing their jobs.
Well, there was this. It was that there was a sense that you know, since there is a lot of unemployment problems in the country, there was a sort of response of people who were in dire straits, of people just being like, "Oh, well, learn to code."
Right.
Like, that's what you should do, obviously, and like that's not always an option for people. But so that caused a lot of resentment, and then when all of these like BuzzFeed writers and I think Vice too got laid off, a bunch of these people were like, "Oh, I guess it's time to learn to code."
Right. I mean, I disagree with that sentiment. I don't think you should make fun of people for losing their jobs because it's just mean. But like, they are kind of right. Like, a lot of these job retrainment programs, you know, like one of the big industries that's going to basically disappear in the next 10 years is trucking, right? So like, this is a really terrible job that kind of is very hard on the body. You know, you're basically sitting down the entire time. A lot of these guys have to take stimulants to stay awake. You know, they're driving like 14 hours a day, and they're trying to retrain these truckers to code, and like these programs are failing. Like massive amounts of people are just not making it.
Well,
as
it's also
coders,
kind of a
you know?
backwards-looking thing. Like you went to school for.
Right, these guys are middle aged. They're not in the.
Yeah.
They don't have.
Well, what I'm saying is like you went to school to learn like camera editing, all these things, and like how many years after you graduated was all of that technology outdated?
It was outdated when I was in school.
There you go.
Yeah.
So this is the problem with like dealing with a problem like by looking at the past.
But what do you do with these people? Because these are good, honest people, and they're going to lose their jobs really quickly. And
Yeah.
Like you're talking about Amazon before. Like Amazon never makes any money, right? They're always reinvesting their revenue. Like these kind of like Amazon is like we're here in New York right now, and New York just steered Amazon away from building a giant headquarter in Long Island City. I mean, that to me, I'm not just seeing a potential headquarter. I'm seeing like a capital for a corporation that will be as powerful as a country, in like a few decades, right? I mean, these are companies that are just they're terrific at what they do. They're destroying the competition, right? I mean, they're moving in on all sorts of retail. They're moving on in on like food services, right? Healthcare industry, everything. So, like if we don't somehow figure out a way to get some tax revenue from Amazon, because that's where all the automation money is going to go to, right? I mean, they're going to basically make a lot of money with this technology. It's kind of like the next economic boom, right? AI and all this kind of stuff. So how do we get this money back? This is why the full circle, going back to the UBI idea.
So here's I talked about why I think there's some merit to UBI, but I think that it proposes a number of real problems.
Okay.
So for one is one of the main ways of funding it is a 10% VAT tax or value-added tax like they have in Europe.
Okay.
Which is like it's basically a tax on spending. So everything you spend, that 10% goes to the tax. The problem with this is that because, economically speaking, price increases are passed on to the consumers, right? So the value of your money goes down by 10% because prices will go up by 10%.
Won't prices also go down because of automation? Won't things get cheaper?
Well, yes, but that's a separate issue.
Yeah.
So the issue of if you have a 10% VAT tax to pay for UBI, then your $1,000 a month is really only worth $900 in today's money.
Sure.
Because everything's going to be more expensive.
Right.
And now, but okay, still $900. It seems like, okay, that's great. I'd love to have it every month. But consider this. The average individual American adult earns roughly $4,000 a month. And assuming the average American or the median American is also spending that money every month, that money is also not going to go as far. It doesn't buy $4,000 worth of stuff anymore because now you have the VAT. So now it's only, $3,600. So they lose $400 of their $4,000 regular income, plus they lose $100 from the UBI $1,000.
Right.
So basically, there's now UBI. Everyone gets $1,000, but the median household is actually losing $500 a month because of the VAT tax.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and for anyone who's making $120,000 a year or more, it's an absolute loss for them, even if they're getting the $1,000 from UBI.
Sure.
So economically speaking, it's not nearly as big of a benefit, and the people who are spending money, who live paycheck to paycheck, they've got jobs. That's the people for whom this 10% additional VAT tax is going to hurt the most, because they're spending their money and they've now lost 10% of the value of all of their money, including all of their savings, because now they can't buy as much stuff with their money. So I think that's the problem with adding a very significant new tax. It's not a tax on billionaires, it's a tax on the people who spend most of their income, which is the poor and the middle class. And it sounds great to give everyone $1,000 a month, but the economics of that are not super. They're not as much.
Right.
And I'm not saying it's nothing. But here's the other issue with that, which is now you've created a country where everyone is relying on this $1,000 a month. And so employers realize that they don't have to pay as much because some workers will be willing to take a job that earns a little less because they know they now have this UBI.
Mm-hmm.
And so it will over time distort the job market and result in lower wages. And you can say, well, minimum wage will take care of that. And minimum wage kind of does, to the extent that the people who get those jobs now have more money every hour they work. But as we've seen with increases in minimum wage, employers, especially small businesses, they don't hire quite as many people. So it doesn't help employment. In fact, it goes the opposite direction from the employment that we want to have.
Yeah, I think that's also the biggest problem is, even if you're giving people money, without a job, what are people going to do? If you're that truck driver and you lose your job, what are you going to do? You're just going to sit around home. Sure, you get your, UBI check, right? $1,000. And maybe if you're living in the middle of the country, that might be
barely
enough. No, if you're in the middle of the country, we're thinking about New York City prices, but what is the poverty line per capita, right? It's somewhere around 15,000, right?
Yeah,
per individual.
So you're still going to be living in poverty,
right?
at $1,000.
But then you can, right? We're talking about that 95% growth in, gig jobs and driving Uber and stuff. Maybe you can supplement yourself in one way, but the problem really is, right? We still don't have job creation,
right? So UBI does nothing to create new jobs. It just it redistributes wealth, but it's actually what's weird about it is you're redistributing. When you do VAT tax, you're redistributing the wealth from the poor and middle class mostly,
sure,
and not from the billionaires that people say they want to tax.
Right. 80% of Americans are living right now paycheck to paycheck, right? They're spending everything they have. So
now their money's going to be worth less.
Well, the one thing
is
that's
why it's very.
But that money will directly come back into the system. That is one of the good parts. But I think, what about the biggest problem is he's saying only a VAT tax, right? So you're right. We're not targeting Amazon so much with the VAT tax. We're not targeting companies those trucking industries that will automate their entire staff, within the next 10 years. So, what then? Corporate gains tax? Are we talking about how do you actually how are you actually going to redistribute some of this new gained resources from automation?
There's a larger question: is it the federal government's job to be in the business of redistributing wealth, and if so, how much? Because here's the when you take it to an extreme, obviously you get communism.
Yeah.
When you take it halfway there, you have a very deeply socialist state. But here's what I would ask is, should it be the government's job to do that? Because what happens is when you have everyone relying on it,
sure, then
the government can never, ever go back and take it away.
100%.
Because
I agree with you 100%.
80% of people who are going to feel like they benefit from it will never elect a politician ever again who says they're going to take away that UBI that you're getting.
But what's really the trend in America in the last 20 years, and I think it's deregulation. And almost from, Clinton and 93 Communication Act,
repeal of Glass-Steagall.
Right, all these things. A lot of the media, we have 5-6 media companies that basically run everything. Mm-hmm. We have deregulation of the airline industry, deregulation of utilities. Everything's getting deregulated. And, I'm not anti-government, but my perception of government is not very good. I typically, I look at their response to technology is really, really slow. They just don't understand innovation or technology at all. They're trying to understand how to rein in all these social media problems they're having right now. And, my biggest worry is that government is there to trust break up monopolies. And I don't think they're really capable of doing that job anymore.
Well, the DOJ has done almost nothing in antitrust or monopoly breaking up.
Look. Now you have state attorneys basically receiving money from the industries that they're supposed to be supposedly being watchdogs. Our entire democratic system has been infiltrated at the highest level.
Well, it does tend to get stagnant when you have these institutions. Then you end up with a lot of corporate funding of political campaigns,
which is why Trump won. I think a lot of people wanted someone to come in and go bam, right?
Well, I think people assume that Obama would break up some of the banks after the Great Recession, but instead he kind of put bankers in charge of the Fed and the regulators, and they didn't. None of the CEOs went to jail.
I mean, why didn't we
But-
just let everything break? You know.
Well,
I mean, that's not politically expedient, but
there's an answer to that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's an answer. There's an answer to why we didn't let things break, because
Yeah.
it probably would have been worse. But the answer isn't let everything fall apart on its own or do what we did, because there's another answer, which is you do a sort of semi bailout, but conditional.
Right.
And the condition could be
There was
that the CEOs go to jail.
right.
They-
Maybe limit their bonuses. To a certain degree.
limit bonuses.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
You could have a different regulatory environment that ensures it doesn't happen again. Put Glass-Steagall back into place, where they don't mix commercial and private banking funds. And so, there's a lot of things that could have been done, and they just weren't done to protect from it happening again.
Yeah.
And
I mean, look at federal interest rates right now. Right. Well, we've been at 1 or 2% for a decade.
yeah,
now.
I mean, they're
That's
going back up slowly.
I mean, they should be going up quicker, I think, right? I mean, it's insanity, right? How much of our economic growth is actually financial engineering? How much of it is actual real growth? Because
that's what happens when you have super low interest rates. It stimulates growth, but not all of it's the kind of investments that people would make
Right.
if there were a bit more money at stake.
we're seeing a lot of protectionism right now, right? And whereas, what's the real thing that's happening? We're protecting ourselves from the future, right? At the end of the day, those coal jobs that we're trying to protect, those manufacturing jobs. I mean, I know it's not nice to say this, but they're going to be gone.
It is
right?
very hard to get the coal jobs back.
I mean, no, there's
Yeah.
just no need for coal. China probably has their own pipeline. I don't think it's really
A coal pipeline?
coal pipeline
Under
right?
the Atlantic.
Right, exactly. Well, it would be a conveyor belt. But yeah, no, I mean, I look at all these things, and I feel like there's something off.
About the world today?
About how I watch a lot of business news, and I feel like a lot of the anchors I see are just trying to put on a cheerful face. They're like, oh man, we're doing great, guys. You should go out there and our GDP's increasing. Americans are doing better than ever, and I feel like a lot of the things we see in the media, a lot of the culture clash, a lot of these racial issues, I do think they directly stem from economic issues, I think.
Which is why we need to put humanity first.
We need to put humanity first. We need to get an alien invasion now so that we start fighting each other, and then we start concentrating on fighting the aliens.
We stop fighting each other and start fighting the aliens.
Yes, unless they're already amongst us.
But what
Mark
happened in
Zuckerberg.
Three Body Problem? When
They came out
You'll
in a
have
movie,
to read the book. No, that's actually not Three Body
It's not.
Problem.
It's
It's
not.
not Three Body
Okay.
Problem.
Okay.
If you want to know what happens in Three Body Problem, you should read it yourself.
maybe I don't want to spoil it, but I'm not sure that what you think would happen, because science fiction tells us what the real future is going to be like.
No, yeah.
That's sometimes true. So, read the Three Body Problem. And on that note, Alan, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And one more time, what's the names of your channels?
Oh, so it's Generation Tech and Generation Films.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Matt Gnezda.
And Shelley will be back soon, we promise. Thanks for listening.